Good morning and welcome to the Virtual College Exploration for all North and South Carolina students, sponsored by the Carolinas Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admission Officers, or CACRAO, and StriveScan. We thank you for joining us for this wonderful session. A few housekeeping announcements before we get started. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type your questions to our presenters at any time. Your camera and microphone are off, so the panelists cannot see or hear you. This is just one of many different sessions happening through this partnership with CACRAO and StriveScan, so we encourage you to check out the full schedule at cacrao.org. This presentation is being recorded and will be available within about a week after it has concluded. I'd now like to turn it over to our presenters so that they can begin their session.
Thank you, Adam. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fred Holden, and I am the Director of the Office of Scholarships and Financial Aid at UNC Wilmington. And I have two other colleagues with me, Tamika Ruffin from CFNC, and as well as Jamie Legg as the Dean of Admissions from Methodist University. We're gonna all kind of tag team and cover the next, I think it's about 10 slides. We will try to answer all of your questions that are sent in during the presentation live. Those that we cannot answer, we will certainly try to answer at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in since we do have just 45 minutes and the schedule is pretty tight. All right, so first slide here, what is financial aid? So financial aid is money that comes from the federal, state, as well as from colleges and universities and private entities, and any of it that's used to pay for college costs. It can be in the form of loans, grants, and or scholarships. I'd say one of the top questions or as maybe disagreements that we get from some families is that a loan is not financial aid. It is indeed financial aid. The one difference is with a loan, you will have to pay it back after the student graduates. Or you can begin repayment sooner, but it is a type of financial aid to help pay for college costs. So there are many acronyms and common terms that are used within the financial aid world, and they do get a bit confusing when we're talking to families. So we want to take a few minutes to go over a number of them now. First one is the FAFSA. Hopefully you've heard of it, the free application for federal student aid. I would say the operative word there is free. Please do not complete a FAFSA application on a website that's going to charge you. There's not going to be any type of benefit from paying to complete the FAFSA. So the FAFSA should always be free. And it opens on October the 1st. It's very important to apply on October 1st or as early as possible in most schools. The financial aid at that school is going to be provided in the order that students apply until money is exhausted. So you want to make sure you apply on or very close to October the 1st. The CSS profile, this is the College Board financial aid application. So this application is only required by some schools. It's not required by all. If you are applying to a specific school, it will let you know whether they just require the FAFSA or the CSS profile. The FAFSA is going to consider you for any federal, state, or institutional aid. The CSS profile is similar to the FAFSA, but it does go into a little bit more detail. More specifically, it asks more information around your assets. And schools that have larger amounts of, of financial aid typically use a CSS profile. So not all will require the CSS profile. Again, the admissions process when you apply, it should let you know whether that school is a CSS profile school or not. I know in North Carolina, the schools, just off the top of my head, are Wake Forest, UNC Chapel Hill, Elon, and Davidson, I believe. And the one that I'm familiar with from South Carolina is Furman. So just very few schools use the CSS profile. The SAR, this is also known as a student aid report. When you complete the FAFSA, you as a student will get this information back in a format which is called the student aid report. So it's really everything that you're putting into the FAFSA, but it's just in a different format and it's called the student aid report or the SAR. Cost of attendance or COA. The federal government requires that every institution creates a cost of attendance for the academic year. And it's an estimated amount, and it includes pretty much anything that's related to school expenses. So start with tuition and fees, housing and dining, books and supplies. It can include insurance. It also can include expenses around transportation costs and miscellaneous out-of-pocket expenses. Not all of those expenses are going to be paid to the university. Some of those will be paid out of pocket, but we're required to give you an estimated cost for the entire year of how much it may cost for you to be a student at that particular institution. So just be mindful when you're looking at the cost of attendance. That is not a copy of the bill. That's estimated costs of everything that you would have to pretty much cover to the university and out of pocket for that academic year. The EFC, or expected family contribution, this number is calculated when you complete the FAFSA or the CSS profile. This number does not mean that's exactly what you're going to be paying to the institution to attend school at that location. The number that is presented is calculated in the background by looking at your total income and your total assets for the family. And then percentages of the income and assets are protected based on a few things like the number of people in the household, the number of people in college in the household, and also the taxes that are being paid. And then at the end, whatever that number is at the end, that's the EFC. And that EFC is more like a number that's used to determine what types and what amount of financial aid the student will be eligible to receive. NBA, or need-based aid, it is calculated by taking the cost of attendance for that school and the EFC. So when it subtracts the EFC from the cost of attendance, that amount is your unmet need. So that's what you're eligible for in need-based aid. And need-based aid can come in the form of grants, subsidized federal loans, federal work study, and some scholarships are also need-based. The calculation of need, as well as understanding how need-based aid works, can be pretty confusing. So I would encourage anyone who has a question, once you start receiving the financial aid, probably sometime next spring, is to just ask that particular financial aid counselor at that school if you have questions around that, and they can help you explain it, to you in more detail. FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. Once a student actually becomes enrolled at that institution, their record is going to be officially protected by the federal government. And this is typically once the student registers for classes, and it might be during your orientation at that particular school. And when we say protection, that means it's protected from everyone, including parents, other family members. So what you want to do is, as soon as you are registered at that school, you want to find out during that orientation period, how do I grant my family access? Every school will have some type of form that you can complete, and it's often called a FERPA release form. And you want to complete that and make sure you grant the appropriate people access to your record if you want your parents to be able to call in or to email in. And in some cases, they can actually log in and access your financial aid or your registration information at that school. And then verification. So the federal government selects a certain percentage of FAFSAs to be completed, so for verification to be completed. And this process requires that you submit some documentation to that particular school to confirm that the information you submitted on the FAFSA is accurate, and it also confirms that the universities are processing financial aid appropriately. The verification process, if you're selected, does not mean that you did anything wrong. Percentage of those that are selected are random. And then there are also some rules in the background of the FAFSA that looks for conflicting information. For example, if a parent said that they were single, and then actually their taxes said that they were married, filing joint, that would be conflicting information. And in that case, the federal government probably would select you for verification, and we would get tax information from you to make sure that we get the information correct on the FAFSA. You have to complete the verification process before you can receive financial aid. So if you get selected, you have to complete it at each institution. The one exception could be that if you're receiving just merit aid, that you don't have to have the FAFSA to receive that particular merit aid. And if that's the case, then verification would not be required for that particular scholarship or those scholarships. So types of federal aid. So when you complete the FAFSA, you're already being considered for any federal aid that's available. So one federal fund is called the Federal Pell Grant. The Pell Grant is a federal grant for high need families or families who are lower income. You don't always have to have the lowest income to qualify for Pell Grant. As I was just mentioning on the prior slide, you could have a moderate amount of income, but you could have a very large family, or several family members could be in college. So that, again, protects the income, and then it could have a lower EFC, and meaning that you're higher need, you could qualify for the Pell Grant. And the maximum amount of the Pell Grant this year is $6,345. So depending on where the EFC falls, that Pell amount could change. Another grant that is awarded to our high need, low EFC families is the Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, also known as FSEOG. This grant can range from $400 to $4,000. Unlike the Pell Grant, which is, I would say, unlimited, it never runs out, it's from the federal government. FSEOG, that is an allotment of money that's given to us by the federal government. So each school has a certain amount. So it does run out. It's not available for every student. And each school has their own packaging parameters. So one school may award $400 to each student. Another school may award $4,000 until their money runs out. It really depends on the strategy that school is implementing. They may want to award larger amounts to fewer students, or it may be a school that wants to reach as many students as possible. So they may award a smaller amount of FSEOG. The Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant is a federal grant as well for students who have lost a parent in one of these wars and did not qualify for the Pell Grant. So if you didn't get Pell, had a parent that passed away in the war, then you would be able to receive the IASG, and it would be in the same amount of the Pell Grant. Another type of federal aid is federal work study. When you complete the FAFSA, you can indicate on the FAFSA if you're interested in work study. And basically, it's a part-time job. The student will work part-time on campus. We have a lot of students who are working remote right now during the coronavirus, but they work with different departments on campus. You may have a specific interest and you want to work in the rec center or in the library, or maybe you want to do some research in the biology lab with the department, and you get paid bi-weekly or once a month, depending upon that payroll at that particular school. And it's just like any other part-time job. You work maybe 5 to 20 hours a week. You earn the money, it's paid directly to you, and it does not go directly to the school. So it'll usually be directly deposited into your own bank account, or maybe in a check for you. In terms of federal loans, there are two types of student loans. There's the subsidized and the unsubsidized federal loan. Subsidized means that it is a need-based loan and it does not accrue interest while you're in school. The unsubsidized does accrue interest while it's in school, and that is in the student's name, and it's awarded based on the FAFSA. The interest rate for the student loan has gone down a great amount over the past few years, which is really good for students. Right now it's at 2.75. At 2.75 interest rate, it can change every year, so you're not sure what it'll be the following year. And then there is a Parent Plus loan that's a federal loan in the parent's name for the student. That interest rate is 5.3%. And all of these loans can be deferred in terms of repayment after the student graduates. It's up to the student and or the parent. If they want to start paying their loans back earlier, they can, but you do have the ability to wait until after graduation. And again, by completing the FAFSA, you become eligible for, or at least be considered for, any of this particular aid. Now I'm going to turn it over to Tamika for a few slides, and she's going to speak a little bit more about types of aid for.
Good morning. Can you hear me? I kind of lost sound. Okay, good. So good morning. My name is Tamika, and I work with College Foundation of North Carolina. So I want to talk to you guys a little bit.
So it sounds like we lost Tamika, at least briefly. I'm going to give her a few more seconds to see if she comes back on.
Fred, while we're waiting for Tamika, there were a couple of questions that I'll go ahead and address at this point in time.
Okay.
So there were a couple of questions about the CSS profile. One student asked if the CSS profile should be completed as early as possible, as the FAFSA form is. And the recommendation with any financial aid application is always going to be to complete that as early as possible. And another question about the CSS profile was, whether or not students would get more aid when they complete the FAFSA and or CSS profile early. And certainly in most schools, that's going to be the case in programs like Fred was talking about, like the FSEOG, which are pools that are limited. Most institutions are going to award those limited pools first. But with things like the Pell Grant and that type of thing, those are unlimited pools, and students are not necessarily penalized for being late in the process. And then there was also a question regarding the verification process. Someone asked if you are discovered having put erroneous information on the FAFSA form through the verification process, whether or not your FAFSA was actually canceled. And the answer to that is no, your FAFSA is not canceled. The institutions typically make those changes and then submit those changes, those corrections when they find them to the federal government. I would say, in my experience, and Fred and Tamika, maybe you can speak as well, 99.9% of the errors that are discovered on the FAFSA form are either errors of omission or just transposition of numbers, or in some cases just, oops, I put the wrong information in that spot. So I think that's got got us caught up on all the questions. There is one that just came through. Are all students eligible for a federal work-study program, or do only certain students qualify? And the answer to that would be, it depends from institution to institution, as well as the level of financial need that you demonstrate. There are some institutions that don't give every student who has the financial need to qualify for work-study on-campus employment, again, because it's one of those pools that is not, an everlasting, unending pool. So I think that's got us caught up on all of the questions there. And it looks like Tamika's back on. So Tamika, I'm going to let you do your thing.
So hopefully you guys, thank you for answering those questions. So just to get back to kind of what aid that you are considered for through your state. So these are the programs that you are considered for through the state of North Carolina. The application for all of these are just by you filling out the FAFSA form. So we talked a little bit about the FAFSA. You are considered for these funds by filling out the FAFSA. And there's certain ones by different types of institutions. So here in North Carolina, we have the North Carolina Education Lottery Grant. That is, the students that are considered for those are for students that go to any of our public colleges, or students that go to our community colleges. So you are considered for that lottery grant once you fill out the FAFSA if you're going to any of those types of institutions. We also have one for all of the students that are attending any of our 16 public institutions. So for people out of state, those are for all of our colleges that start with UNC, schools like East Carolina, Western Carolina, North Carolina A&T. Those are kind of considered our state institutions. And so students that are applying to any of those colleges are considered for the UNC grant. The North Carolina Community College Grant is obviously for students who are attending any of our community colleges in the state of North Carolina. And then our North Carolina Need-Based Scholarship are for students that are applying to any of our wonderful private institutions here in the state. And again, no separate application, just by you filling out the FAFSA. We also have a state program that we always like to mention that is really based on students depending on their major. So for some students, if they are going into nursing or if they're going into teaching, we kind of have sort of a high level for kind of health science and education majors. So if you are a North Carolina student and you are thinking about going to college in the areas of health sciences or education, definitely consider our Forgivable Education Loan for Service program. Now, this does require a separate application. They would like for you to complete the FAFSA, but you do have to do a separate application for this. And the way that you find this application is on the CFNC.org website. So that's kind of a nutshell of what is offered through the state of North Carolina. And again, that's for North Carolina students and residents. So now we'll take a look at some of our South Carolina programs. So we'll go on to our next one. So these are our South Carolina programs. So here in South Carolina, you're also considered for funds through your state. So again, remember I said North Carolina residents were considered for those funds. For students that are going to any of the high schools in South Carolina, these are the funds that you are being considered for. So there's a couple of different programs that are very similar. So the first couple of ones, you do have to complete the FAFSA for. So again, that would be your application for these programs. The South Carolina Lottery Tuition Program, that one kind of works a little bit for the same way it kind of does here in North Carolina, but it's just for two-year colleges. So it's not for all the institutions, it's for two-year colleges. And then the South Carolina Need-Based Grant, that is also by you filling out the FAFSA, that is for students who are attending any private college in South Carolina. So again, the first one is for two-year colleges, and then the second one is for private colleges. And they also have really other great programs that are offered through the state of South Carolina. And some of them do require a separate application that you would get from your high school guidance counselor, or you would get a separate application just by going to the South Carolina State website. But all of these programs are primarily, they have a very heavy focus on your grades, of course, and your GPA, but the minimum GPA that I've seen for those has been at least a 3.0. So if you have at least a 3.0, you can apply for these programs. They have a very heavy emphasis on the areas of math and science. So if you're thinking about going to college for math and science, there are sometimes opportunities for you to receive a little bit more for majoring in the areas of math and science. You do have to, of course, attend a college or university in South Carolina in order to receive them, but they are available for you as well. And it's the same thing with our North Carolina funds and even for South Carolina funds. You are not allowed to take those funds out of state. So when you get a financial award or offer from your college, it will not include, especially if it's an out-of-state school, it will not include any state funds on your offer letter. You do have to attend a college or university in your state in order to receive those by either you doing the FAFSA or doing whatever separate application that they require. And now we'll move on I'll pass it on now to Jamie, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about some private resources that can help you pay for college.
Thank you very much, Tamika. We do have a couple of other questions that I was going to go ahead and answer live here. So there's a question about, will you only receive scholarships if you go to college in South Carolina, or will it also apply to another state? Typically, state grant programs are not transferable across state boundaries. So if you're a South Carolina student and you get one of those South Carolina scholarships, the Life or the Palmetto Scholars or the Lottery Scholarship, that's not going to follow you to a North Carolina school, and vice versa. The North Carolina Need-Based Scholarship or the UNC grant are only going to be good at in-state institutions. So, so that's something. If you decided to go to a school outside of your state, you certainly may lose the eligibility for those scholarships, but those institutions may still have some things available to you through institutional scholarships. And we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. And the question about how will scholarships work for athletics, honestly, that's something to speak with the coaching staff about. Every school is going to treat athletic scholarships in a different way. Some institutions are going to reduce academic aid if you get athletic money, and maybe even need-based aid as well, and some will not. So that goes institution to institution and that type of thing. So I'm going to take a break from answering questions here, and I'm going to get into my portion. And I think that a couple of the questions that I saw may be things that are going to be answered, answered down the road. So we'll have a question and answer session at the end. I'm known for talking a lot, but I promise you I'm not going to talk too long today. I'm going to give you just what you need to know. So I wanted to start out talking about private scholarships and scholarships from what we term outside sources. One of the big things that students overlook in the process is the amount of money that's available through these outside resources and outside organizations. As we see here, there are lots of different options I always recommend that students start locally with their scholarship searches. Go to your high school guidance offices. They typically have some great resources, in particular when it comes to some of these local organizations. Your local Lions Club, Elks Lodge, Water Buffalo Lodge, Moose Lodge, those types of things. The scholarships from your Kiwanettes and your Rotary Club and those types of things. Don't forget about churches. Don't forget about local service organizations and civic organizations, because there are literally millions of dollars of scholarships that are out there and available that go unclaimed on a year-to-year basis. I'm going to give a quick anecdotal story. When I was in your position as a high school student, I'm a first-generation college student. My parents did not go to college. None of my parents' siblings went to college. My mom has 8 brothers and sisters. My dad has 5 brothers and sisters. I have, we think, 38 or 39 first cousins, and none of them had ever gone to college. My family was a very working class family. One of the things that was great in my family was that there was never a question that I was going to go to college. It was always, where are you going to go to college? But because of that, and because of my family's situation, financing the education was always going to be something that was difficult. When I was a junior in high school, I attended a financial aid seminar, and I got this advice that I'm getting ready to give you. And that advice is that I think that every student should apply for every scholarship that they think that they might qualify for. When I was a senior in high school, I applied to over 60 scholarship and grant programs, from local, regional, and even some national scholarships. I filled out the Tylenol scholarship. I filled out the Coca-Cola scholarship. If I were a student today, I would fill out the Papa John's scholarship and the Pepsi scholarship and every possible scholarship program that I could apply for, because the reality is you're not going to get a scholarship that you don't complete an application for. Nobody's going to come knocking on your door saying, hey, we've got money for you. Let's give it away. If you get that knock on your door, please call the police, because it's not legitimate. Nobody is going to just offer you money. You have to find that money. You have to be organized. You have to be exhaustive in your search. You have to be thorough in your search. Your parents' employers may have scholarships. One of those 60 plus scholarships that I applied for was at my father's place of employment. It was $500 per year for 4 years. And I will tell you that after I filled out the application, I found out that I was the only person that met the guidelines for that scholarship that year and also filled out the application. That was the one scholarship I really liked my opportunity to be awarded. So I filled out, as I mentioned, 30 plus or 60 plus scholarship applications when I was a senior in high school. And I heard yes 3 times. So you're not going to hear yes very often. And I want to make sure that I prepare everybody for that. You're not going to hear yes very often. But in my case, those 3 scholarships were pretty significant. I got 2 that were $500 per year, and I got 1 that was $1,000 per year. Over the course of 4 years, that was $8,000, and it made a huge impact in my ability to attend college. And the next bullet point here is the Google search scholarship search engines. What I will tell you guys is this. You all live in the age of information. When I was in high school, and not to date myself too much, Google did not exist. In fact, the internet did not exist when I was in high school. I had to do the old-fashioned search. There was this great, big, huge scholarship notebook that I had to thumb through and find scholarships that I thought would be useful. And I'm going to talk about this do not pay portion as well. But I didn't have a search engine that I could just type into. I will also tell you that there are some incredibly useful resources that are available free of charge online For those of you who are in North Carolina, College Foundation of North Carolina is a fantastic program. I would look at CFNC. I would look at your local community organizations, the North Carolina Community Foundation in North Carolina. I'm sure that there's a similar organization in South Carolina, the Triangle Community Foundation in the Raleigh area, the Cumberland Community Foundation in the Fayetteville area. There are tremendous programs out there with tons of scholarships, but you have to search for them. You have to find them. The other thing that you guys have that I didn't have when I was a senior in high school is you have this thing called Microsoft Word or Google Docs, where you can just hit find and replace, and you can change the name of the scholarship, and you can change the date and those types of things. When I had to do scholarship applications, I literally did 60 plus actual scholarship applications with new letters and new references for every single one of them. I couldn't just hit find and replace. So you guys do live in that era of technology, in the age of technology. There are apps for scholarship searches. I would encourage you, College Board, ACT, those types of organizations all have some fantastic scholarship searches, but you have to look for them. You have to find them. You have to be organized, and you have to be thorough. If you can do those things, I'm confident that most of the students will find something along the way if they're thorough enough and competent enough. But the other word of wisdom that I will give you is you should never pay for a scholarship search. I will tell you, I was guilty of this when I was a senior in high school. My parents were overwhelmed. We didn't have Google. We didn't have phone apps. So my parents paid, I think, $250 for a scholarship listing. And it was supposed to be, I filled out this long questionnaire telling all about myself. And it was supposed to be, tailored to me. And the first page, I got this big, thick page of, booklet of scholarships with one per line, it seemed like. And the very first one said you needed to be a left-handed female. And for those of you who can't tell, I am not left-handed. So hopefully that joke got a little bit of laughs out there anyway. But don't pay for scholarship searches. They're out there. The information is free and readily available to you. The next source of some funding are some non-federal loans that are through private lenders, credit unions, local banks, Sallie Mae, PNC Bank, organizations like College Foundation Incorporation. There are tremendous loan programs out there. And one of the big advantages of a down economy is that lending is, right now, the interest rates are as low as they've ever been. So a loan is not the worst, the worst thing that you can do. So there are some great private loan programs out there. I want to talk a little bit now about some institutional aid programs that are available on most college campuses. You'll see there that most institutions, particularly private institutions, have need-based grant programs. In addition to some of the federal and state grant programs, most institutions have scholarship and grant programs that are coming from their endowments that are based solely on your financial need as well. So the most needy students can get, still get scholarship and grant monies beyond the federal and state grant monies as well. And there are a number of institutions which agree to meet 100% of your demonstrated financial need with scholarship and grant programs. Some of the more well-endowed institutions, some of the most expensive institutions in the country can actually be some of the most affordable institutions when it's all said and done. I work at a private institution, and I can tell you one of the things that I tell students every day is that for most of our students, they're paying about the same that they would to attend a public institution once they go through the financial aid process. And for some of our students, they're paying less than they would to go to a public institution. Now, of course, on the other side, some of our students are paying more than they would to go to a public institution. But the reality is most institutions have need-based grant programs, in addition to the academic-based scholarships that we're going to talk about in just a second, and the federal grants and state grants that are available. There are academic scholarships that are available from private and public institutions. A scholarship or grant, it never has to be repaid. Remember that. So, you know, if you're looking at a school that maybe costs $50,000 a year, but they're giving you a $30,000 a year scholarship right up front, that school doesn't really cost $50,000. That school costs $20,000 after they've given you that scholarship. And those awards are going to vary based on your profile, how attractive you are to that institution, the types of things that you bring to the table. You know, there was a question about athletic scholarships. Division I and Division II institutions can award athletic scholarship. You know, there are music-based scholarships, there are service-based scholarships, there are performance-based scholarships. So every institution has in their quiver of arrows scholarship and grant programs that are available to help defray the cost of education. We as higher education institutions understand that most families don't have the types of money that it takes to fully finance their education, particularly the private institutions. And that's why there's so much financial assistance available and so much emphasis on making certain that you explore and exhaust all of those options. You may get scholarships right at the time that you apply to the university. I'll tell you at Methodist, if you're admitted to the university with above a 3.0 GPA, we're going to give you some level of scholarship. Now, the amount of that scholarship is going to vary dependent on your grade point average, and we're not alone. This is something that's very, very common on college campuses, is that with your acceptance letter, you're getting this, congratulations, you're accepted, and oh, by the way, here's some great scholarship and grant monies. So don't dismiss a school because of cost until you've gone through the process. I want to just real quickly share some tips with you, and then we're gonna open it up. We've got a few minutes left, and we'll open it up for question and answers here. So a couple of tips that I'm going to give you. I'm going to tell you real quickly. I've got a daughter who is a 2021, and some of these tips are tips that I gave her, and some of these tips are tips that after I looked at this presentation I gave her. Some I gave her right up front, but I definitely wholeheartedly agree with number one there. Start a folder. You know, get a Google Drive going for your college applications. Have a financial aid folder within that Google Drive, and you know, have a spreadsheet with the scholarship name and the deadline and the documents and a link to all the applications and you know, what types of supporting documents you need. And then when you start getting financial aid award letters from institutions, save those to that same folder. Understand what you're getting from each institution, and then know and understand the financial aid award that you're getting. I know I saw a question earlier in the Q&A that I knew was going to come up here later. You know, is the financial aid renewable for 4 years? Well, you're filling out a FAFSA form for each year. So things like the federal Pell Grant and the SEOG and the North Carolina need-based and the UNC need-based, those are not necessarily something that you're going to get every year. For most families, they will. For most families, your need level stays pretty consistent over a 4-year period, but it's not guaranteed. But are things like the academic scholarships renewable, or the need-based grants renewable? And if so, what are those requirements? Is it just that you have to maintain satisfactory academic progress? And if so, what is that satisfactory academic progress? Is there a certain grade point average that you need to keep? Do you need to be on campus or off campus? These are all questions that you should have for the financial aid office. And it's good to have answers to that information in one place where you can look at all of those things together, compare and contrast, and have that as part of your decision-making process. And then when you do apply for financial aid and receive financial aid, make sure that you're actually accepting all of that aid, and doing everything that you can through applying for financial aid and applying for those outside scholarships to borrow as little as possible. But on that end, I will also tell you that loan is not a four-letter word. Unpaid loan is a four-letter word. But loans for education are one of the best investments that students can make. Your college education, it has been statistically proven that a college education will improve your lifetime earnings 3 to 5-fold over what you would earn otherwise, at least. So what we're talking about here is borrowing money responsibly, but making an investment in your own future. Start saving. You know, if you're working a part-time job or a summer job, use some of those earnings to help rent books or buy books. Most people rent now because it saves a lot of money. Maybe help your parents with residence halls, spending money, those types of things. But you do have a responsibility to help finance your education. So those are the things that I wanted to share with you now. I think we'll go to the question and answer and see if there, or I'll turn it back over to Fred and we'll go to the question and answer and see if there's anything that was unanswered.
Thank you so much, Jamie. So just a couple more things before we get to the any last questions that we may have. This is just a slide of the links that we've already gone over, the different websites we've gone over, where you can complete the FAFSA, the CSS profile. If it's required, you can actually go to that website and see which schools require the CSS profile. Studentaid.gov is going to give you information about the terms and conditions of federal loans, as well as online paperwork that's required if you do take out the loan through any particular institution, or for any particular institution that you're going to be attending. It's awarded through the FAFSA from the federal government, but you still have to accept the loan through the institution and then complete this online paperwork. The federal government is working hard to condense all of their resources into one website. So I think in the coming months, you will see studentaid.gov more frequently, and you may not see FAFSA.gov. It will still point to the same website, but you should be able to find everything at studentaid.gov. There's the CFNC website, as well as the South Carolina State website, in case you wanted to make a note of those. And then lastly here, contact information. It's important to know that every institution is going to have their own process, their own deadlines, their own priority dates, their own resources. So we advise that you go to that university's website, search for the financial aid information, and get their contact information. And you should be able to find at least email and phone numbers, but because of the online nature of things now, you should also find the opportunities for maybe Zoom office hours or Zoom hours for financial aid counselors, or even a live chat option. So make sure you do that. You want to make sure that you know exactly what's happening at that particular school. They may have a separate scholarship application deadline, and you want to be familiar with all of that. So now we're going to take the next minute or so and answer any questions that we have not answered. Tamika, do we have any questions remaining that we might need to answer? If anybody has any questions, type them in now. We have maybe 60 seconds.
Yeah, I think most of them have been answered in the chat. And I don't know if there's any that you want to just read out loud, Jamie, or that you saw that you wanted to read out loud, but most of them or all of them have been answered in the chat. Did anyone else have anything else that they wanted to ask?
I think I'll just comment on what's listed there now. We were talking about saving a file of all the information that you need and that you've had for the year while you're applying for aid. Yes, if you absolutely prefer to save it in a Google Drive or on your desktop or within your phone, as long as you have quick access to it, because you may need to refer back to it at some point.
And I see that someone asked about, I don't know, or trying to figure out what documents are needed for the FAFSA and where they can find this out. I would recommend, of course, you can contact the college's financial aid office and they can let you know, but on the studentaid.gov website, that has all the information on there about what forms are needed, what you need to do, and how to submit the form. So I would go to studentaid.gov. That would be the best resource.
Pardon my interruption. I do want to thank all of you for joining this particular session. It has been incredibly informative. And so with that in mind, we ask that you, once closing your window, complete the 4-question survey that should appear. We also encourage you to sign up for more sessions, which the full schedule can be found at CACRAO.org. A recording of this particular session will also be made available within the week after it has been concluded. Lastly, a transcript of all the questions that may not have received answers will be sent out to the actual panelists, so you will get your question answered. Thank you and have a wonderful afternoon.